So let's talk about the guys that do have money. Like here's a big piece that a lot of guys make good money in door to door. And right now, a lot of them are actually finishing up their summer and they get big checks in October. Like they're like, "Oh, I worked my ass off," and then they all get paid in lump sums. Well, a lot of these guys will go just buy a cool car and they'll go spend it, they'll be idiots, and then the few and far between are like, hey, and that's what I did. So like I was driving a Kia, I was the #1 rep at Vivint, they're like $1 billion company, and I was making great money, and I was driving a Kia Optima, and everybody's like, why don't you have like a Beamer and a lifted truck like all of us? And I'm like, because I could spend an extra 50 grand on that, or I could go put it into a rental property. Right. And I just kept buying duplex and fourplex and duplex and fourplex and threeplex. And I've rolled it up into apartment complexes now. And it's like, I'm like, well, because I can put that money to work. I'm only 23, I'm 25. You know what I mean? Like, why would I do that? You know, why do I need a fancy car to get the chick? Like, no, dude. Like, and so I guess if you're in your 20s and you're making $500,000 or you're making 300 grand and you're selling, like what advice would you give that guy?
Well, you know, I'm only 44 and I was one of the youngest guys that got into business at the time. I think I was 21 when I got licensed. So I know what that's like. You know, we grew up relatively, I wouldn't say poor, but we didn't have a lot of money. Growing up in, dirt shithole Texas called Denton at the time.
Been there. Denton. Yeah, I was like, wait, hasn't gentrified that much, dude.
I mean, everything in Texas has gotten a little bit bigger. But yeah, I mean, we grew up there, so I wasn't born with a silver spoon, always kind of like hustled my way through college. And so I know what that's like, getting that first 6-7 figure check. And, I was never married, no kids, and I was almost allergic to money. It would come and I couldn't spend it fast enough because I knew how easy it was now for me to make money. The concept of saving, I wish I had met myself 20 years ago, or I wish I had a mentor. So I didn't do any of that. So now I can tell people what you should do, but no, I didn't do any of that either. And I wish I had. But I
went through similar pitfalls where investing in what my buddy was investing in, or investing what everybody else thought was going to be the next hot thing, and I lost a lot of money that way. And that was kind of the passion behind this newest venture that we started. Was I got tired of having to give shitty advice that the firms wanted me to sell, but then I also don't want to charge my friends a commission or a fee to like, hey, let me manage your portfolio. I'd rather just give you the same access that I have, so you've tapped into 20 years of a Rolodex that I have and the contacts that I have. So if you show me an investment in the PPM, within 30 to 45 minutes, I can tell you if it's bullshit, where the pitfalls are, or I can make a few phone calls if it's in a sector that I don't know. And so we started a club called Insider Investors Club, basically for guys like what you were saying, guys that are either just starting to get in or want to build a solid portfolio. We meet up quarterly, we do Zoom calls, and basically I just give you guys, hey, this is what I would do if it was me. If you're 44 and you want to do this, like here's the best guy in multifamily, and you want passive income. And I would say to the audience, specifically your guys, that, like you say, they're younger, they get this chunk of money, treat everything almost like a pie. And when I say pie, think of just like, a pie chart. Everybody's pie is going to be different. If you're single, you don't have any kids, you really don't care if anything happens to you and you leave a legacy, then you're not going to care about life insurance. But if you do have 3 kids and you're the breadwinner and you have a lifestyle, obviously life insurance has to play a part, but now you got to deal with the shitty life insurance salesman, right? Some of them are great. Some of them are just there to sell the one brand that they were promoted to sell. So there we can just give partial advice. We're like, hey, that's the guy I would use, or that's the guy I would use. And then I can look at that portfolio and say, okay, that guy's charging too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But not charging a fee or a commission to give that advice. So that's become a really good passion project for us. And by doing that, we've now syndicated oceanfront, condos, restaurant franchises, and different investments where I'm putting my money side by side with other people, and we're just doing a friends and family investment together.
And I love those. So I partnered with a guy, Jason Harris, who we did this apartment complex together, and he was a financial advisor for 10 years. And similar story, like he's just like, wait, and then he shifted everything to real estate. And when a guy can put his money side by side with you, you go, cool, he believes in this investment.
Yeah,
you know what
exactly.
I mean? And that to me is like the biggest indicator of, is it a good investment or not? Is this guy doing it, or is he just in concept talking about it?
Right. And going back to that pie story, so for you had a really successful experience in multifamily and real estate. So for somebody else, the 30 to 40% should be in real estate. Now, if they want to do a tech play, instead of going and buying Tesla stock, find a company you believe in out here, or through guys like myself, making it a true private equity play where you know the CEO, you know who you're giving your money to, you can go and audit the books. You're not dependent on some dude in Wall Street, fudging the numbers by 1-0 and all of a sudden your stock goes down 60%. So everybody says, the stock market, and I'm just not a big believer in it, dude. And I look over a 20-year career, you can't really, nobody ever says, oh my God, I love my financial advisor. I love the stock market. Unless they grew up next to Zuckerberg or had a big tip, you never generally over a long period of time successfully invest because you're investing with emotion. You're selling high, buying low, selling high, buying low. Selling
100%.
low, buying high because the fear that FOMO, as they call it, right? When the market's at an all-time high, the Denny's waitress, everybody's like, oh, we should be in the stock market. But then that's right when everybody jumps in and it crashes. When it crashes, everybody gets scared and gets out. So this cycle just continues and people keep investing with emotion and then they make money, they lose money, they make money, they lose money. The brokerage firms make money, the financial advisor makes money. The average investor isn't making money in that traditional model.
Yeah. So let's say, how do you vet a deal? Let's say your buddy comes to you and he's like, hey, I want to buy into this restaurant franchise, or I'm starting this tech company and you should give me 50 grand so that we're going to go to the moon. You know what I mean? Like, how do you vet do you have like a vetting process?
Yeah. So one of the first things I've done that was really hard for me to do is I started surrounding myself with people that I felt were smarter than me. And for the longest time, I felt like I was the smartest person in the room. Even at these big events where the compliance guy was there and the CEO of these firms were there, I just felt like they weren't asking the right questions and the harder questions, right? Because they had a financial interest in that product making it onto that platform. So for me now, to use the example that you said, a tech play, we were approached recently by a company that's heavily involved in the social media space. They're designing a whole new platform against cancel culture and all these advertisers that are canceling people for different beliefs. And so, it was a tech play and it was a high risk tech play. So I consulted and called up everybody that I knew from the Wall Street days that knew those types of businesses, that understood the metrics of a pure growth company that has zero revenue, but makes sense to have a $500 million valuation.
Yeah.
So the first thing to answer your question is yes, we have almost like a committee to where we'll look at a deal. If it's real estate, I have a panel of real estate experts I tap into. If it's multifamily, if it's development, if it's value add, if it's tech, if it's a tech player or stock, then I definitely tap into those circles. Then we look through their financials. Now, again, having gone through a massive fraud situation, seeing actually massive fraud unfold in front of my own eyes, not just at the Wall Street level, but on the individual level, I go into a situation assuming it's bullshit. So, our buddy Wagner that we were talking about that I've been up here, he's been in this business 20 years. He lives, eats, and breathes hospitality. So I know he knows his shit in that category, but the old Tony would have just trusted him. Now I think Reagan said it, trust but verify.
Yeah.
So now I'll still look through the books. I'll still run the financials back into the numbers, making sure it makes sense. We got heavily involved in this Everbowl franchise where Drew Brees is a big celebrity investor, et cetera, et cetera. The old days, if Drew Brees just put in a couple million, then my money's safe. You know what I mean? Now I'm not just relying on a fancy name or celebrity endorsement or even their own CFO. So I try to double, triple, quadruple verify and go into a situation knowing that there's a chance you're going to lose your money. So whenever I give presentations or talks, it's not to sell anything anymore, but I always tell people, like, don't invest if you can't afford to lose every fucking penny you put in, because there's really no guarantees. I used to always say, when I'd sell, whether it was an annuity or an insurance product or real estate, I would say, well, in a doomsday scenario, here's what would happen with your money, right?
Yeah.
And I remember it was right before COVID hit, I made one of the biggest risks where we syndicated a huge project down in Corona del Mar, California, where, a 3-bedroom condo goes for $2.8 million. So it was a tear down, we're rebuilding it. And so it's a lot of risk. And halfway through that, fucking COVID hit. So plan check is down. We just demoed this $4 million asset. We're sitting on a pile of dirt. And I'm like, fuck, the doomsday scenario happened. So now I don't say in a doomsday scenario anymore. I'm like, an asteroid's going to hit my project. So anything can happen, dude. One of the biggest lessons I learned in my career was actually almost the first couple months into it. I just got back from New York, had an amazing 2 weeks in the Trade Center. It's my first time in New York, and got to wear my fancy suit and tie to the office and be at the top of the Trade Center and blah, blah, blah. And then we come back and we're pounding the phones, because back then that's the only way to get clients. And the branch manager calls us into the office, about 100 advisors. And the market was just getting crushed day after day after day, 400 points down, 500 points down. And he calls us into the office and says, guys, I've been doing this for 30 years.
relax. This is as bad as it gets. Call all your investors and clients, tell them to double down. And, if you loved it at 10, you love it at 5. Great. We go to the phones. Dude, the very next day was September 11th. So we come to the office. Everybody's crying. We don't know if our friends are dead in the building. And he calls everybody back in the same conference room. I still get chills thinking about it. And he says, guys, remember yesterday when I told you this is as bad as it gets? Well, it just got a hell of a lot worse. And that it hit me. I'm like, dude, this guy's been in the business 30 years. That was his doomsday scenario, So just when you think something can't happen, oh, real estate will never go higher, or it will never go lower. That stock could never hit 0. Yeah, it can. It probably will. So just be planned for it. Don't go all in on one idea, whether it's business, an investment, even a career path, right? So many people where it's so all in on their business, and then COVID hits, and they're like, holy shit, I'm relying on human contact. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So there's so many lessons in those little calamities that I've learned over the years, whether it was the recession, whether it was, the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, or all these other big firms going out of business, and just seeing these huge pillars of institute. Lehman had survived the Great Depression. They'd been around for 100 years. B of A almost going down, their merger with Merrill Lynch saved them. So all these big names, if they could fail, then your business could fail, my business could fail. So learning to have additional sources of revenue. So if tomorrow tech goes down or
Internet just gets wiped out, you have other hustles and you have other ways to feed your family.
I love that. And it's like one of the things that I love about door to door. And it's probably where you got your grind, was sitting on the phone calling insurance, or selling annuities or whatever that is. And it's like, you can't take that hustle away. What I mean? There's a muscle there.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing a good service and doing something that is much needed, because one of the things that made me successful just being in your studio here and knowing you for the time period that I've known you is you started thinking outside the box. So even though it's called door to door, and your plug or gimmick, if you will, is tapping into the original you. You started door to door. I started on the phones, but immediately we were looking for not necessarily an easier way, but we were thinking, God, there's got to be a better way, whether it's reaching your audience through social media, or et cetera, et cetera. For me, the only access I had was to people that were doing rollovers. So I knew that if I could find an engineer that's in between jobs, his 401k is up for grabs and I could roll it into an IRA. So while we were trained to cold call engineers, I went on hotjobs.com and I pretended like I was an employer so that I could have access to everybody's resumes. So that I'd call every engineer within a zip code and say, hi, I'm calling regarding your resume that's online. They would be like, oh my God, hey, yeah, no problem. They'd stop what they were doing because they think they're being called for a job. Are you calling me for a job offer? I said, no, but I know you're in between jobs and you're probably gonna have a 401k rollover, so let me just give you some information. When you're ready, call me. Oh, okay. They have no idea that I'm looking at their resume, that I know every phone number that's not listed in the phone book because they put it on their freaking resume.
Yeah.
Did you get my cell phone number? I said, it was online. So I never lied.
Yeah.
But that's how I contact. And my point is, thinking outside the box. When you're in sales, you can't just be so like, if Facebook leads is the hot thing right now, don't just be dependent on one tranche, right? Funnels, as they call them now. And it's like constantly fill multiple levels of marketing funnels. So if one thing goes down or goes out of favor, you have other ways to do it. And I think that's what's made you really successful. And anybody who's in sales right now listening to this, think about it. Think about your number one source of revenue right now, your number one lead gen source. If that got wiped out tomorrow, what would you do? Would you sit there and cry, or do you have a backup plan? Implement those backup plans right now, even if their ROI of those is lower than what you're doing in a traditional sense.
That's awesome. Yeah, because a lot of people got scared of door to door with COVID. It's like face-to-face selling. People are like, wait, what do we do?
Yeah.
And a lot of people pivoted to Zoom or Facebook, you know what I mean? And then some people doubled down, but it's just like you said, doomsday, what is that?
Yeah.
And it can happen, and being smart about it. And then also just like playing full out and not being willing to, because I mean, how many people you talk to that just hoard their money and just have $1 million in the bank account?
Yeah.
And you're just like, what are you doing?
Fear creates that inaction, right? So, I mean, especially for people that have lost money. And unfortunately, I meet too many people that lost money through a shady salesperson, whether it was investments, a house, a bad investment opportunity, crypto, whatever. But when people go through a financial loss, I definitely don't mean to diminish sexual assault or a violation, if you will, but going through something like that, it is a violation. You've worked so hard for your money, and overnight you realize you can get wiped out, or that somebody else who
you didn't even know has access to you can wipe you out. And so when you go through something like that, when people go through a financial loss or a divorce or something really emotional like that, to where, you know, you thought you had a net worth that was this, and all of a sudden it's wiped out and you're just grateful to not be bankrupt, it's powerful. And what you do with that afterwards is even more powerful. And I think that's the biggest thing too, that the more I started talking about the depression I'd been going through or the suicide thoughts, and just being like, dude, that shit can happen to anybody. You know, anybody's lifestyle that you see on Instagram, they didn't start that way, you know. And the ones that are more authentic, I think, are the ones that are benefiting people, and the guys that are just showing the fancy shit, but then not telling you the bad side of all that and what they went through to be able to afford those things, whether they're renting them, posing with them, or whatever. There's a story behind all that. And if you're just hiding behind the flash, you're not being authentic to yourself or to your audience or to the people you're trying to help.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, no, I can relate a lot right now. Right now.